Welcome back, friends, family, and other, to the 26th episode of Lords.
Yeah, 26.
Shut up.
26.
I am one of your hosts, Pat Weston, with friend, lover, and otherwise ethereal entity, Atlas tonight.
That's me, Atlas, here tonight for Lords.
Yay!
We have another great episode prepared tonight, and this is a favorite, one of my favorite topic of dark, mysterious, folklore-y kind of things. If you liked the Skinwalker Wendigo episode, you'll like this one, which this one's going to actually heavily reference that too. We're going to be talking about that episode a lot.
That's awesome.
Kind of like a sequel, which I actually mentioned doing this episode, I think, in that one. So
yeah, I think so.
So here it is. I'm going to give an advisory warning right now, and I'm going to do it again later. This episode is going to contain some extremely graphic descriptions of true crime events. So if you are worried about that, tune off. But if you just want to listen until then, I will let you know when it's going to happen again. Because it's going to be later on in the episode.
Visuals. There's not going to be any visuals to go along with it. So if you have an overactive imagination, maybe it's not.
There's no visuals. I'm not showing any pictures or anything. But just so you know, I'll say again later when it happens. It's in the last part of the episode.
Sure.
Before I'm going to start off, and I'm not even going to say what we're talking about. We're going to see if we can surmise what we're talking about after I talk about three stories. Three ancient legends.
Okay.
The first one going all the way back to the 2nd millennium BC, where we have a story called the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm assuming you've heard of this.
Oh, yeah. Actually, yes.
Yes. Yeah, it's famous.
Gilgamesh.
Yeah, I think he's referenced in the Bible. I haven't read the Bible, but I think he's in it.
He's a playable character in Civ 6.
I thought you were going to say he's a playable character in the Bible. But yes, he is a playable character in Civ 6. He was the son of Lugalbanda, the 5th king of the first dynasty of Uruk, which is the kingdom of Sumeria, sometime around 2600 BCE. So very, very long time ago. This is like pre-Egypt. This is like Egypt is just starting out. This is very, very old, cradle of civilization level humanity here.
Right.
So he is featured in a story called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And in this story, it's a very long story, but there's a bunch of different parts of it. It's actually very similar to a Bible, how it's divided up by different people telling different stories.
Right.
But one specific story has a focus on Ishtar. Ishtar? I think it's Ishtar. Ishtar, yeah.
I think it's Ishtar, yeah.
Ishtar, goddess of fertility, love, war, and sex.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my favorite. And she is in love with the forever handsome and Giga Chad like Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is mentioned. Yeah, he's written down as he's constantly mentioned in the epic as a god king.
Yeah.
So he's a king, yes, but he's also very like powerful, I guess. I don't know the full details, but he's a god, the god king Gilgamesh.
Again, if you've played Civ 6, he's very strong.
Yes, very strong and handsome. And following both those ideas, and like I previously said, being the Giga Chad that he is, he rejected the goddess of love and sex. And the story...
he's got other things he got to worry about.
Yeah, but there's a reason, and that's what the story's about. The one specific reason that he rejected the god of love and sex, and this was based on his previous his knowledge of her past suitors, and one young suitor in particular was enough to scare Gilgamesh away from this goddess. And this one suitor was a young shepherd who had fallen madly in love with Ishtar and would leave her bountiful offerings at a shrine on the mountainside, basically dedicating his life to it. Ishtar would encourage the man, teasing him and flirting with him. He would continue to leave offerings, lusting after the goddess more and more, eventually where he would start to neglect his normal duties to focus on now supplying the offerings at the shrine. Eventually, however, Ishtar grew bored of his devotion, turned the young suitor into a wolf,
Oh.
where this now wolf would get attacked and bitten by his own hounds, making him run away, never to be seen again.
Oh, that's sad. What an asshole.
Yeah. So, bad times for that dude.
Yeah, right?
And so Gilgamesh said no thanks. But that's the end of that story.
Great.
We're going to go forward probably 1,000 years and plus a little bit. There's no date on this story, but it comes from ancient Greece.
Okay.
And this is another story of a man and a god. This time, however, it was a bit different and doesn't have to do anything with lust, but instead just kind of an asshole. And this guy's name is Lycoon, the son of Pelasgus. And Lycoon was famously the king of Arcadia and was known to be impious and cruel as a king. So not liked by people. And he was so hot on his own trot that he thought he would try to trick Zeus, the god of gods. Of all people, he was going to try to trick Zeus.
I can already tell where this is going.
Likely for no reason other than to just say that he did it. Because there's no motivation for him to try to trick Zeus. And what he did is he served him a meal made of meat, but he didn't tell Zeus it was made of human flesh.
Oh, wow. What a fucking psycho.
Got him.
Yeah, wow.
Unfortunately, however, for Lycon, he was not fooled, and Big Daddy Zeus got pissed as he realized it was human flesh.
Right.
And, getting pissed like he does very easily and often, he decided to flood the world. This was an event known as the Deucalion's Flood, which is mentioned in a couple other myths, but this is the origin of that. And as a final punishment, he turned Lycaon into a wolf.
Oh, that's kind of like where the phrase lichen comes from.
Yeah,
maybe?
So you're noticing that. There we go. 2 stories of people turning into wolves. And we got a third one.
What?
This one comes from the north in the saga of Volsunga, which tells the story of Father Sigmundur and son Sinfjotli, who discovered 2 magical wolf pelts in a hut while hunting that had the power to...
North name.
No, very much. Especially Sigmundur. That's the most Norse name I can even imagine. They found 2 magical wolf pelts while hunting that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days. Cool. The father and son donned the pelts and they transformed, subsequently going on a killing rampage in the forest.
Not cool.
During this time, they would not only kill animals, but also at least 13 men. And who knows how many animals as they ripped and teared with their new wolf bodies. The rampage would end only when, running out of prey, the father turned and hunted the son, causing a lethal wound to him. The son would survive, however, thanks to the timely arrival of a raven, who gave a leaf with healing powers to the father, who he would soon give to the son. They returned the pelts to the hut and burned the hut down so no one else could make such a grave mistake.
Probably a smart idea, yeah.
So, if you haven't come to the realization yet of what we're talking about, tonight's episode is all about werewolves.
Oh, I was going to say gods, pissing them off.
No.
How to do it.
No. That's the last we're going to talk about, the pissing off gods. But, this is the beginning. We're going to be talking about werewolves. Those 3 stories are the oldest origins of the European-style werewolf I could find. I searched for days on the internet looking for werewolf origins. Everything points to Gilgamesh, and then I was like, well, that can't be the only one, so I found a couple others. The saga of Volsunga is the one I already knew. That's pretty famously the origin of werewolves to a lot of people and a lot of mythology.
Right.
It goes all the way back to ancient Sumeria with Gilgamesh, like we mentioned, showing that werewolves are a pretty old legend that has terrified people going as far back as 2600 BCE.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And while Sumeria and Greece both feature a god turning a man into a wolf as punishment, the third story, being from Viking oral tradition and oral stories passing down, tells of 2 men choosing to become the wolf of their own volition, and then seeing the danger of man becoming beast, and then ending the curse themselves.
That actually reminds me a lot of the companions in Skyrim.
Yes, very much. It's a similar idea where because they choose to become werewolves, right? But then they realize, like, oh, this is bad.
Yeah, or you can make the decision that it's bad. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think isn't like their origin is like they did initially choose to be the werewolf. It was not out of a curse or anything.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, well, I think it's fairly obvious that the Raven in that story also is Odin.
Probably.
Or one of his ravens at least. It shows that the gods again did get involved with man turning into wolf in this legend. But not really, he helped them as opposed to curse them.
Sure.
Which we talked about in our previous episode. Odin is the gift giver.
Yep. I'm a big, the more we talk about Odin, the more I'm like, I like this guy. He's got a little dark, he's got a bit of a dark side to him.
Yeah,
sure, but
all gods do.
Yeah, but for the most part, he's very he just wants people to do okay.
Yeah. Odin helped out. And we'll be talking about Odin very soon too, a lot more. But despite the fact that we talked about Sumerian Greece, there's not really much else to talk about with them as far as werewolves go in that time period. Like, that's it.
Sure. Fair enough.
The Vikings, however, this is where we go over what we know as werewolves today and the folklore of that. Like, the European werewolf, 99% of that legend comes from Vikings. Like, this is the origin. And
oh, okay.
Yeah, the Volsunga saga was written down in 1270 CE, so that's only less than 800 years ago. But sure. We don't know how long the story of Sigmundur and Sinfjotli had been orally passed down before that. We don't know. We know it's very old. It just was written down for the first time in the 13th century.
Right.
But it does also, the fact that it was written down in the 13th century puts it down as one of the most recent incidents of man turning into a wolf in mythology and religion. Because like I said, it's not that long ago. This is just pre-Christianity to the start of Christianity in Viking society. Right. This was when Christianity was spreading heavily in the north. It's already had kind of taken over at that time, but they were still writing some of their myths down. So, it's a pretty recent telling. Another thing is that before this was written down, back when this was just a story and pre-Christianity Vikings, the Vikings raiders would often growl and howl at their enemies, and they would don wolf iconography on their shields very often.
Right. Yeah.
So victims of Viking raids would often refer to Vikings as sea wolves, as they would arrive like a pack of wolves in the night from the ocean and pillage their land.
Right.
And the English,
cool name, though.
Yeah, that's a great name. That's still used. A lot of people refer to Vikings in fantasy and stuff as sea wolves.
Right.
The English, however, gave them a different name, which, due to what they did, which was Ware, as in wares, and they called them werewolves because they would steal all their wares in the night. So that's the first. Yeah, that's the first time. That's the first time the werewolf word is said, but it's spelled differently. It has a very specific meaning to it. But the werewolf stories in Viking lore show the complexity of the wolf as a symbol, because on one side they were fierce beasts who stalked the night in packs hunting their livestock. When this was a common fear, for the Norse were heavily agricultural and livestock, and it was their main source of food.
Right. Yeah.
And on the other side, the wolf was a revered holy creature, being Odin's chosen beast, as well as showing their high intelligence and social behavior, which is what we believe Vikings going to base their society on, is the pack life of wolves. So, a quote from Lars Brownsworth from the book The Sea Wolves, A History of Vikings, which is one of my sources for this episode. He says, quote, "Wolves prowl on the edges of society. They're destroyers, kind of a night creature, and they are the strongest in some ways where men are weakest. Vikings, especially particular tribes, embrace the connection between man and wolf."
I like that. That's cool. I mean, we've always had a very strong connection with dogs. So
yeah, exactly. And Vikings are no exception. They were some of the first people known to hunt with hounds, likely because they tamed the wolves. Right. And some of the biggest dogs today come from Norway and Sweden. So, those, wolf edge of society, wolf people.
Big time, big time.
Also, in the language Old Norse, vargr means exile as well as wolf. Because being exiled was being sentenced to live like a wolf in the forest, the enemy of mankind. And this was the worst punishment of all, due to Viking culture being heavily social and family-based. And being punished, then this punishment was often seen as being worse than being put to death.
Jeez Louise.
So you could, a lot of times when you were judged for exile, or judged to death, you had the choice of exiling yourself instead. And you would be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably what I'd choose.
Yeah, which a lot of people did. Obviously, like you just said, they don't want to die. It's like, yeah, I'll go exile myself. But you would get marked as the Vargir. Usually on your head, you would have the rune of the Vargir scarred onto your head, so people knew forever you were exiled. And when you were legally able to be hunted or killed by other members of your clan.
Well, that's sucky.
People that usually did this were murderers, so that's why.
Okay.
Kind of an eye for an eye idea, you know. Vikings had an extreme belief in family structure and remaining close to your kin, similar to wolf packs, and would always believe that you needed to watch out for your family above all else. Okay. So, if you were to kill a close family member, your punishment wasn't exile. It was worse. You would be strung up by your feet and put next to a live, hungry wolf.
Oh my God.
For having acted as a wolf which will slay its fellows, quote unquote. That's what their law says. This punishment was directly inspired by the events of Sigmundur and Sinfjotli, who we talked about earlier. It's Sinfjotli. I don't know, dude. Sinfjotli, maybe?
Sure, that sounds close.
Yeah, so the point of that story is the father turned on the son, so, you know, the wolf slays his fellow. That's where the thing comes from. In Viking mythology, Fenrir, son of trickster god Loki, the god of wolves, is often seen as a large black wolf, but sometimes is drawn in Old Norse art as a hybrid anthropomorphic wolfman hybrid. This legend of Fenrir goes that he has to be bound in chains due to the prophecy of Ragnarok, which states that Fenrir will devour the sun and kill the Allfather Odin and begin the event Ragnarok, known as the end of the world.
Classic Ragnarok.
Yeah.
Big fan of that lore.
I will do an episode on Ragnarok, I'm sure, one day, because it is crazy. I love Viking Norse mythology. I actually have a physical book that I got from Sweden that my family brought me when they visited Sweden. That's got like all the Norse lore. It's like all the lore of the gods.
You'd probably have a good time with the game Age of Mythology because there's a whole section of the
love that game.
That's just Norse. Yeah,
love that game. Norse mythology is my favorite because it's basically reading Lord of the Rings.
Pretty much.
But yeah, so Fenrir gets out, kills the sun, eats the sun, kills Odin. It's likely the message is that chaining up Fenrir is what caused him to be so angry in the first place.
Right.
That's, you know, like if they didn't chain him up, he probably wouldn't get out and want to kill Odin. But this again shows the case of wolf duality in Viking society. They fear the wolf god, as he will destroy them one day, but wolves are holy creatures dedicated to Odin, so they respect Fenrir. And if they disrespect him, that's how his chains will break, and he'll come hunt them down and kill them and Odin in the world. You know?
Right.
So you gotta walk that tiptoey line. You gotta respect the wolf, but, you know, you also gotta be afraid of the wolf.
Well, it's kind of what wolves are in real life. So.
Yeah, 100%. It's like, I think it's all a good analogy just to man of nature. Like, respect nature.
Honestly, yeah.
You know, but give it its room.
Totally stop doing.
Yeah, 100%. Different bands of Vikings would generally worship different gods, but of course, the most popular was Odin. And Odin worshipping bands would have specialist groups of warriors known as the Ulfhenar. And these soldiers were known for being particularly wild. They would wear wolf pelts instead of armor, and would often wear the head of the wolf like a hood. They would sharpen their fingernails to use as weapons in battle, and would often bite at their shields and howl, riling themselves into a rage before combat. Historically, these are all facts. We know that these war bands of Ulfhenar existed. There are stories on both sides of them. However, we don't know why they would act this way. The most likely answer is there was shamanistic rituals to Odin, which would have them breathe in or consume hallucinogenic herbs or mushrooms. Mixed with their faith and knowing they are going into battle would rile them up into a blood frenzy. Because you get high and you're like, well, we're going to go fight, and I'm Odin's chosen. You just keep riling yourself up while you're high. It's going to change the direction of your high, right? So, you know. In the saga of Harald Hardrada, King of Norway, who also playable in Civ, he's the King of Norway from 1046 to 1066. He claimed the Danish and English throne as well. Big deal Viking. It is mentioned that he used the Ulfheanar as elites among his own troops. It is recorded that these warriors would even sometimes turn on their own men in battle during their fists of rage and bloodlust, but they were never punished as it was expected.
That's counterproductive, but okay.
Yeah, they would kill all their enemies, and then while there was friends around, they would just keep killing, calm them down. They were seen as animals, man-beasts on the battlefield, and able to take out multiple men at once. These elite warriors would often be hailed as heroes and would come home as revered champions of Odin. So, now we're going to talk about the other side of what we just did, which is the people across Europe on the receiving end of this.
Okay, how'd they treat this?
As you might assume, pretty quick to write stories of these Vikings and their wolf warriors. These stories are likely what is to be the origin of the modern werewolf legend.
Right.
Besides the nickname werewolf we mentioned earlier given to them by the English, these stories of wolfmen attacking settlements all over Europe and wildly attacking their own men and just being insane and howling, wearing wolf heads on their head, didn't help the fact that they were with the Vikings, who at the time were known as the mysterious Northmen.
Yeah.
The North was a very cold, distant land to most Europeans, especially those in the Mediterranean, which, don't forget, the Vikings did go all around Europe into the Mediterranean raid, often.
Oh, yeah.
Turkey and Italy were not spared Vikings. They were all hit by Vikings.
Yeah.
So those people, they were from such a far away land, it was crazy.
I mean, the Vikings found the Americas before we did.
Yeah.
The other white people.
They also founded Sicily. So
Right.
just talk about that. Didn't found Sicily, but they're modern Sicily, like the European nation of Sicily, comes from Viking raiders staying there. So the legend of the Vikings or the sea wolves and their wolfmen would spread like wildfire across Europe. Not only just as news, but also to scare children, keep them inside at night. The wolfmen are coming. Scandinavia was also home to many legends at the time due to it being so far away and desolate, like I mentioned, that in most regards it was too hard to even live in. So the fact that men could come from there was legend enough. Add some of them being monstrous half man, half wolf, and you have yourself the beginning of a legacy of terror that exists to this day. So now we've cemented werewolf like origin, right? Like that's where they come from. These Viking warriors likely are these werewolves. It makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense.
This also is supported with the life of William the Conqueror, which we're going to talk about real quickly, which I would also love to do a whole Lords on. He's crazy. In the year 1066, William the Conqueror invaded and conquered England, ending the known Viking Age. However, this point is that William was the Duke of Normandy. Normandy was populated by Viking descendants, which, the name Normandy is close to Norse. That's why they're called that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
actually.
they're called actually the descendants of the Norse. They're the Norsemen, the Normans. You see?
Oh.
That's where it all comes from.
That's interesting.
Yeah, William would be even called a wolf by members of the French court due to his Viking heritage.
I think I knew that part.
Yeah, he's known as the wolf. That's kind of like his animal. And the thing is, Normandy was at this time not very French, even though they were part of France. Like they spoke a lot more English and Norse than they did French. So they were kind of like a separate state within France, but they were technically part of the French court. Which is why William kind of left. He's like, fuck, I'm going to be English, and just conquered England and did it. The Vikings' adaptability to live anywhere would have their people create the medieval states of England and Sicily, like I mentioned earlier, which were both huge medieval powers, and which, of course, would spread the Viking culture throughout Europe, including their legends and myths. So now we have the werewolf physical influence of the Ulfheanar, wolfmen, and now we also have mythological stories of werewolves being spread throughout Europe. So our next stop on this history train is the 12th century, where we saw a French poet by the name of Marie de France write the story Bisclarvé, or translated to werewolf.
Wow.
Werewolf, the current spelling. This is thought to be the first time the word werewolf was printed. The word is likely from North Germanic dialect at this time, where the word wer, W-E-R, meant man, and wolf, W-U-L-F, meant wolf, W-O-L-F, as we have it today. Put together, you got werewolf.
Bam.
In the book by Marie de France, they wrote a story of a man who was a baron who has the ability to transform into a wolf for 3 days a week. He is only able to turn back into a man when he puts his clothes back on.
Oh, okay. That's an interesting one, but fair.
So one day his wife got mad with him and hid his clothes, forcing him to remain in the form of a wolf. Eventually, the king learns of this and sympathizes with the beast, returning his clothes to him and giving the baron back his lands and titles. This story is written a century after William the Conqueror would rule England, and it is likely thought to be based off of his court. Besides being referred to as a wolf, William's Viking ancestry was well now known at the time, and his history was talked about. People often refer to the English as no better than Vikings in France. So, I think it was kind of a shot at France being a shot at England, them being werewolves.
Yeah.
And while this book is the earliest written story of a werewolf in modern time, it makes it easy to assume werewolves were already a feared thing, because if you would write a book about it, I think we know now that people are talking about it.
Yeah, well, at that point, like you mentioned in Europe, that story was pretty popular at that point. So.
Yeah, and since they're now writing a book about a werewolf, it's like, okay, I think now we can confidently say at this point in history, people knew what werewolves were. And Marie de France's story would start an age of romantic werewolves, where they are seen as tragic heroes, being cursed, or sympathetic victims of a curse, like in her book.
Right.
Instead of being feared creatures of the night, the werewolf became the medieval equivalent to being Disneyfied. Many books and short stories of the medieval age would feature knights in shining armor fighting these werewolves, but the werewolf would usually end up dying while turning back into its person, tragically revealing it was an innocent man, or their wife, or even a surprise showing that the werewolf was the knight the whole time. That kind of thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so they made the werewolf this kind of tragic character.
Which is nice. You gotta have those romantic periods.
Yeah, but during this time, the church was rising in domination. And that, however, would change these fanciful stories, and they would be put to rest, and the werewolf would return as a symbolic beast to be feared.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So we're going to talk more about Europe in a second, but I'm taking a Europe break because I want to bring up, while this episode is mostly about European werewolves, I think it's important to note that there are werewolves, the werewolf was not region locked. It is talked about throughout the entire world. People have stories of werewolves. Or even man-wolf hybrids. Man turning into wolves. Animals, man turning into other animals, or man-animal hybrids being a horrible thing. Yeah. Sure. So, and I'm going to do a little notes on some of those. Firstly, South America, there's I think it's pronounced the Luison, Luison. This is a legend that is also just known as the South American werewolf. The myth is heavy in Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. But the myth stems from the Portuguese belief that the seventh son of a family of all boys would turn into a Luison on the night of a full moon, especially if it fell on a Friday.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those little. One of the things I love about folklore is the specificity.
Yeah, I was about to say. Yeah.
Like, it's so specific.
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's basically the myth, and this myth is still heavily believed in South America to the point where many families don't have more than 6 kids. Especially in Argentina. Argentina is where this legend is heavily known. And as far as description, it's just a werewolf. It's a person that turns into a wolf on a full moon. That's the legend of the Luison.
Is that where the full moon thing comes from?
We'll talk about that a little bit later. It may be. I mean, I don't think so, but this definitely is another example of that existing.
Got it. Okay.
In Mexico, a little bit north, we have a legend known as the Nahual, pronounced N-A-W-A-L, spelled N-A-H-U-A-L, so Nahual, I guess is how it's pronounced. Sure. Despite being a colony of the Spanish for 300 years, the Nahual myth did not commingle with the European legend of werewolves, and is in fact still around in its original form to this day, dating back to the Aztecs.
Oh, that's interesting.
This Mexican legend does vary from region to region. Some regions believe there are guardian spirits in the form of animals, while others believe they are monsters to be feared, where powerful men transform into even more powerful animals and cause harm, usually caused by sorcery and witchcraft.
Oh.
So there's the Mexico version. In the Philippines, there's the were-dog. There is no wolves in the Philippines, but there is dogs, and it's known as the aswang, which is a shape-shifting creature able to take many forms, and the were-dog is just a specific kind of aswang. So
Sure.
I could do a whole episode on aswang because they are fat. It's like a blanket folklore, like legendary mythical creature term for like everything from vampires to werewolves to zombies in Philippines.
Cool.
Like everything, basically, they're relative under this term aswang. These were-dogs, however, are particularly known for hunting down pregnant women on roads who have their hair up, for it is said to ward one off if your hair is let down. Again, there's that specificity coming in.
Yeah. So
if your hair is
weird,
down,
all
you're
right.
safe from werewolves. Don't worry about it. In India, there is the legends of the sorcerers using dark magics to turn men into were-tigers.
Cool.
And this story is almost identical in old Russian Siberian local stories where witches would turn men into werebears.
No, whale bears. Sorry.
Yeah,
The rhyming makes whale bear.
maybe a cute word, the opposite of cute in reality, because if you thought werewolves were scary,
Sure, yeah.
I think a werewolf bear is even worse. Were-tiger too. That's something I don't want to deal with.
Tigers are hunting people
yeah.
now, by the way.
Oh yeah, tigers love hunting people now in India, so be careful there. So finally, on the worldwide tour, I can't not mention the Skinwalker, which of course we covered in a previous episode. This is often known as the North American version of the werewolf. If you want to know more about that, go listen to the Skinwalker episode on YouTube when it gets uploaded, because I'm not going to spend
next week.
I think, yeah, I can say it's very soon. It's not something I'm going to go into now. They just share the trait of men and women being turned into shapeshifters via dark magic, sometimes doing it themselves. But if I go super in detail on Skinwalker in a different episode. Back to Europe, we can talk about how stories vary region to region, and medieval theology states the werewolf is as real as demons or vampires, and they're often seen as a satanic beast who wants to eat human flesh.
Thanks, Christianity.
Thanks, Satan. France and Germany specifically were hotbeds of werewolf fear, which is going to be the focus of the rest of this whole episode, basically. Stories and legends of them were passed down from werewolves. And France, we have the legend of the loup-garou. Have you heard of this?
No.
So,
Loup-garou, huh?
Yeah, Loup space Garou. So, if you know Vampire the Masquerade, which is a game series and tabletop RPG series, which I've mentioned a couple times, there is another book series that shares a world called Werewolf Apocalypse, and the most powerful form of werewolves are called garous, based directly on this. The loup-garou is a werewolf which is seen as a man-wolf hybrid, opposed to a man becoming a wolf. They are usually cursed by a witch and turned into a beast for either slighting or cursing at the witch. This legend will even go over to Canada and America with our heavy French influence, and spread to another North American legend we have in Louisiana, which I'll probably do an episode in on some time, or in a compilation of monsters, which is the rougarou, known as the the southern swamp werewolf.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, that is a thing in Louisiana. A lot of people who do the hoodoo stuff down there very much believe and fear the rougarou. They are werewolves that just stalk the swamp, so just as terrifying as a regular werewolf.
Gotcha.
So not only does rougarou sound like loup-garou, but they feature almost the same exact story and origin. The loup-garou, yeah, 100%. And the loup-garou started the medieval era as a legend and is the first European werewolf we know of to be a large man-wolf hybrid, which is very common to how we see them in a lot of stuff today. Not like a man just turning into a dog, but a two-legged, giant, terrifying, teeth-gnashing, clawed, muscled man beast. That is how the loup-garou is drawn in France. Like in the old art, they have loup-garous next to men and women, and they tower over the men and women. They have animal heads, like fully. So they're like, that's the idea.
Gotcha.
In Germany, there's many stories featuring a werewolf, especially the Brothers Grimm, mentioned in the Grimm's fairy tale, Little Red Cap.
I had a big book of those.
Oh, yeah. You might know the story we're going to talk about now, then.
Probably.
So the story Little Red Cap is Little Red Riding Hood, other places. There is
a lot darker, though.
Yeah, yes. We're going to talk about a different story, however. It's a much lesser known story. written by them, it's a very short story. It's about 3 paragraphs I have here. And I'm just going to read the whole story.
Oh, okay.
So it starts with a soldier stated this story happened to his grandfather. His grandfather went into the forest to cut wood with a friend and a third man. There was something strange about the third man, but the grandfather couldn't tell for sure what it was. After they had done their job and had become tired, the third man recommended they take a nap. Accordingly, the 3 men lay down on the ground and closed their eyes. The grandfather pretended to fall asleep, but kept his eyes slightly open. He was keen to find the reason behind the third man's strange behavior. The third man looked to see if the other 2 men were sleeping. After feeling confident that both men were asleep, he put on, or took off, a belt and became a wolf. But he didn't resemble a natural wolf. He looked somewhat different. He quickly ran off to a nearby field, where he ambushed a pregnant female horse and devoured it completely.
Jesus. Okay.
The man came back, took off or put on his belt, and lay down again in human form near the others. While returning to town, the third man complained about having a stomach ache. As they entered the town gate, the grandfather whispered to the man's ear, "When one devours a whole horse." But before he could finish his sentence, the third man interrupted, "Had you said this to me in the forest, you would not be able to say this now."
Okay.
So, yeah, that's the Brothers Grimm story of a werewolf.
Yeah. Just, hey, if you said that in private, I would have fucking killed
if you said that a couple minutes ago, you'd be fucking dead. Basically is what happened. So lastly, in our European little tour of folk stories, we're going to talk about Eastern Europe and Slavic countries. We have a similar werewolf story, but there is a very interesting distinction. In the Slavic language, the word is vukodlak. In Czech, it's vlikadolak. In Serbian, it's vlikslak. In Greek, it's vrikolakakis. Vrikolakis.
Those sound so regional to those respective places.
Very regional and very similar. All that's made up of the same letters. Yeah. These words all mean the same thing: werewolf. But they have a second meaning: vampire.
Oh, okay.
So in many legends of this area, werewolves are similar to that of Europe, where they're, a witch curses a man to become a wolf. But the big detail that distinguishes them is they often get resurrected by necromancers, becoming what is known as a vampire.
Okay.
And so in a lot of Eastern Europe stuff, which keep in mind, this is where like Dracula comes from, like all that stuff.
Right.
The vampire is a resurrected undead werewolf. That is the only way a vampire starts.
Oh, I did not know that. That's
so, yes, instead of turning into a wolf, they turn into a bat because they have cursed undead blood.
Right, okay.
So, it's like that's where the similarity is shared. Instead of eating meat, they drink the blood. So it's like kind of like the distinct. That's the vampire, right?
Yo, bats get a bad rap. They're just little
bats
flying rats.
They're flying dogs. They're sky doggos.
They're cute.
I love bats.
Me too.
So that was the first part. That was part 1, origin of werewolves.
Got it.
Now we're going to go into part 2. What is a werewolf? And now we're going to talk basically, we're leaving origin stories and going into I'm going to describe what a werewolf is, how werewolves act, Werewolves are typically described as humans turning into wolves, as we have covered. Some stories, it's a permanent change. Some stories, it's got a condition, such as putting on clothes. Sometimes they say the werewolf is in control of when it goes from man to beast. Werewolves are commonly cursed people by a witch and turn into a werewolf against their will. But sometimes it's a choice by the person to enchant themselves. Oftentimes, skinwalkers are witches who chose, that we talked about, to turn themselves into monsters for power. But in European stories, this sometimes has an innocent origin, where they want to turn into a wolf simply because they want to have help hunting, because they're too poor and they can't make a bow. Or something as sinister as wanting to kill others without getting caught.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the first one was a little bit
wholesome. The first one is that is a common story, origin story for werewolves. They just want to hunt better. So they turn into wolves so they can hunt their meat. Many legends, the person receives the curse of lycanthropy, have to meet with some condition for their first transformation, usually the full moon.
Yep.
Now, likely this is due to this being the time that many people would hear wolves howling. After that, however, they're able to transform. Their ability to transform varies to sometimes only being on full moons, sometimes being whenever you just want to transform into a wolf.
Right.
Sometimes it's a magical belt.
Oh.
Which he talked that the story we just talked about mentioned that he took a belt on or off. We're not sure which one it was, but they had a belt. And we'll talk more about magical wolf belts soon. But a common feature in modern werewolf stories, which you notice we haven't talked about, is their bite. And this is the fact that lycanthropy is a transmittable disease or infection that's hard to track, and so they bite you and you turn into a werewolf. Right. So I tried my best to look up what the source of this is. And I couldn't find it in any old myths, any old legends. Nothing mentions werewolves biting each other, biting other people and spreading. Really? So the first record I could find of this happening seems to be the 1935 movie Werewolf of London, where a man is bitten by a strange creature when hunting in Tibet, and they come back and turn into a werewolf. After that, the 1941 film, The Wolf Man, shared the same idea, where the guy is going hunting in India and is bitten by a feral boy, quote unquote, and then returns as a werewolf. So, since then, the idea of a werewolf is pretty much changed into that being the standard way that lycanthropy is transferred.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it just kind of got popular in Hollywood and changed how they work.
I honestly just thought that was always going to be part of the origin, but it's not. I guess
no, it's always comes from witches.
Witches or gods.
Yeah, witches or gods turning people, like, magic basically turns you into a wolf.
Right. Yeah.
This is likely also simply because when you're writing old stories like that, magic is what you go to because you don't understand the science of like a transferable disease. So that's a much more modern way to look at lycanthropy, right? One of my source books for this whole thing was a book called The Werewolf in Lore and Legend by Montague Summers. This was written in 1933. And I'm bringing this up now because this book, written in 1933, 2 years before Werewolf of London, never once mentions biting. Spreading werewolves.
Gotcha.
And it never mentions werewolves even being able to be spread at all. Like, it just says werewolves themselves. Unless the werewolf himself was a talented sorcerer or witch, they can't make more werewolves. Like, you have to, yeah.
It's just classic fucking big government coming in and telling people, hey, watch out for diseases and wash your hands.
You're right, yeah. Trying to tell us to wash our fucking hands and shit.
It's gross.
So
wash your hands, people. Wash
your
hands.
Please wash your hands. The common traits are usually magic, a full moon, transforming into a wolf or wolf hybrid. Those are the common traits, right? So, story of an age where people actively believe these creatures stalk the night and often report seeing wolves turn into men. When the wolf is chased away, it's always like, oh, I chased a wolf, and they saw him turn to a dude. Even in France, where the loup-garou is known wolfman hybrid, more akin to the modern werewolf, like we mentioned, most legends in France still just talk about men turning into wolves.
Gotcha.
That's still the much more common path. The full moon idea is something that might not even be so far-fetched, as the full moons even have effects on normal humans. New Age moon worshipping stuff aside, according to a study at Australia's Calvary Mater Newcastle Hospital, full moon brings out people's rash and violent behavior akin to a beast. The study showed that 23% of all violent acute behavior at the hospital would occur during full moons.
There's that. You know the show Scrubs, right?
Yes.
Like, there's literally an episode of Scrubs that talks about this. That
really?
Goes over the fact that, which is kind of funny. Like, they talk about, and they kind of try to scare the interns. They're like, hey, it's a full moon tonight. And on full moons, patients get wily. They get rowdy and stuff. And then it's turned into a funny thing, of course.
Right.
It's a sitcom. But they touch on that. And there's actually been a lot of that too. I've worked with seniors for years now, and when I worked at a nursing home for like almost 2 years, there was a little bit of that kind of super. Some of the like nurses' aides and stuff like that would occasionally be like, "Oh, it's a full moon tonight. Are you working the night shift or the morning shift?" And I'd be like, "Morning," and they'd be like, "Good," and I'd be like, "Okay."
Yeah, this government funded study showed 23% of all violent outbursts were during a full moon. That's a high percentage.
That's a very high percentage. Yeah, that's a very high percentage.
And most of these,
I'm of the I was gonna say, like, I am definitely of the opinion that like if the moon's got a grip on the sea, because like literally the moon's gravitational pull pulls the ocean, like it's very. You can assume that the moon can do something.
Yeah, whatever bodies. the moon radiation is real, and so that could be affecting us. Just doing little mood swings.
Absolutely.
And most of these patients in these cases at this hospital would not punch or kick; they would bite and scratch. And this is specific. Always, they would bite and scratch. And these instances would basically be that they would just never kick and punch. They would bite and scratch. And it's important to note, I will say, a lot of these violent incidents, drugs and alcohol are involved. But it's still a very large percent of people attacking specifically on full moons.
Right. There's also some people that would even suggest that like when you take narcotics like that, it brings out a more
enhances
side of you.
Yeah.
So so just saying.
So
I'm not saying that that's true, but
there's no official common link between the we don't know why this is happening. There's not like official science as to why it's happening, but maybe medieval ages people would act up on full moons, and this was a known thing, causing it to feature in this legend. So, appearance-wise, the werewolf changes by region. Those turned directly into wolves are seen as large wolves, bigger than normal wolves, and they either are alone or in a pack of other werewolves, or sometimes even regular wolves. They are described as being the same color as normal wolves, often matching the hair color of the human who turns, though very few stories ever even mention the color of the wolf's pelt. And in real-life eyewitness reports of werewolves, they often just say that they're black, but this is likely due to the fact they're seeing them at distance in the night.
Right.
Hybrid werewolves, such as the Lugaroo, look like what you would see in a movie such as Underworld. They're massive, brutish werewolves, opposed to the universal version of the Wolfman.
Gotcha.
Yeah, old art will show them being larger than men with wolf heads and large clawed hands, like I mentioned before.
Right.
The movies such as Werewolf in London and Wolfman show a more tame version of this, where it's a hybrid werewolf with just large amounts of body hair and sharp fingernails. This midway Hollywood version is likely just due to the lack of ability to do special effects or costuming to make them look like, like the more modern Underworld movie werewolf.
Right.
Even the Mexican story of the Nahual, which I mentioned earlier, the art of them shows them as a man-wolf hybrid, which is a very large, towering over person, looking similar to the wolf, the French Loup-garou art. Another common feature of werewolves is the consumption of human flesh. Like every other feature, it changes story to story. Sometimes they require the flesh to live. Sometimes they hunt down humans just because they're easy to prey. In older legends, there's no mention of human flesh being eaten by werewolves. This feature started in the 16th century, during church domination time. And in France and Germany at the time, there was a lot of werewolf activity involving people getting eaten, culprits being declared werewolves.
Yeah.
So that's, the human flesh thing. That's where that comes from. Lastly, I want to mention silver. Because we haven't talked about it yet, and there is almost no references at all in any werewolf story before it started showing up as a weakness to werewolves in movies. It seems like the idea comes from a story in German folklore where the beast of Gévaudan, which is a suspected werewolf, was killed by a famous at the time vampire hunter who was using silver bullets.
Got it.
This is likely because silver has to do with the moon in alchemical tradition. So it's likely they used, like pre-science, the moon had to do with silver, and they believe that silver comes from the moon kind of thing. Like it's the moon's metal. Right. So it's likely that since these are beasts turned during a full moon, they could use that as a weapon kind of against them.
Sure. Okay. I love silver, by the way. It's very pretty.
Silver is very pretty. When you get clean silver, it's great looking. I'm on board with the silver. And keep it handy in case you want to kill some werewolves, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah, or vampires. So it is a known weakness of vampires and vampire myth, and maybe because also the Eastern connection with vampires and werewolves.
I was going to say, there's been a lot of connections this episode with werewolves and vampires.
Well, yeah, they always are connected. There's a reason. So part 3. Stories of werewolves. This is where the content warning comes in. If you are sensitive to descriptions of gore and stuff and true crime, learning about body discoveries, details of discoveries of gruesome body sites, this is where we're going to get into that detail.
Right. No pictures though. So don't
yeah,
worry
there's
about
no
it for those
pictures.
watching the
So
live
if you're
stream.
just if you're watching the live stream, we're just listening. This is what we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about a story first of the 12th century Ireland. A priest this is 12th century Irish folklore. A priest
I think I
accompanied
might know this one.
by a boy was traveling from Ulster to Meath. One night in the woods, a wolf approached the priest. As it came nearer, it began speaking of God. The priest became terrified and couldn't believe what he was seeing and hearing. The trembling priest asked the wolf what kind of creature was he that had the shape of a wolf and but the words of a man. The wolf told the priest there was only one other creature like him, and it was his wife. They were native people of Ossory, cursed by a saint named Natalis for some ancient sin. The curse compelled the two Ossory people, a man and a woman, to take the wolf form and remain in that form every 7 years. After that period, 2 new people would take their place, and their prior 2 would return to human form. The wolf told the priest that this wife was very sick and dying. He was there to seek the priest's help in his wife's absolution. After all, they are just ordinary human beings under wolf skin. Baffled and still terrified, the priest reluctantly followed the wolf. When they came near the ailing wolf, it thanked the priest for agreeing to administer the viaticum. I think that's how you say it. Viaticum. It's like the last rites. But sensing hesitation in the priest and to assure him he wouldn't commit blasphemy by giving the dying wolf viaticum, the male wolf peeled the skin of his ailing companion from the head down to the belly with his claw. Seeing a weak old woman underneath the hanging wolf's skin, the priest gave her the last rites. Upon concluding the viaticum, the male wolf rolled the wolf skin back over his wife's body. The old woman returned to her wolf form. End of story.
Maybe I didn't know that one.
So the reason
I know about a story of werewolves in Ireland, but not that.
Yeah,
one.
there's the Irish definitely have their own werewolf lores and stories of wolfmen.
Right. Yeah, that's probably
but
what it is.
we're not. This is actually the only Irish story we're going to talk about today, because the interesting thing about this story is that it is recorded history. This is not a myth, according to the Irish. This is written in the annals of Irish history, recorded by a historian, indexed in the Topographia Hibernica, which is a treatise on Irish geography and folklore, written towards the end of the 12th century, likely 1188. So, Now, of course, this is wild, but unlike other stories, this was written down as like a fact. Like this was this is not written down as something. So a lot of people do believe werewolves exist. So people who are of that mindset, this is a very particular story because it just records this as happening.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Werewolves are real. Go ahead.
Yeah, but it's just folklore. But is it? But is it? Next, we go to 16th century France, an area plagued with werewolf attacks, and reports that the church had that the church actually had to stop sending out inquisitors and would actually have to hire out freelance vampire hunters to take care of problems such as the ones you're about to go over. Overall, the French would kill over 30,000 people for suspected lycanthropy.
Jesus.
So I wanted to just take a break to talk about vampire hunters and how these were a real thing. There were people, and you can find antique vampire hunting kits to this day. They were out there. There was people who worked freelance for the church and had, garlic and crosses and silver bullets and silver swords and mirrors and stuff, and holy water, and they would hunt these creatures professionally, and towns would pay these people to come in and kill these things. Now,
we really glorified these people.
Oh, absolutely. They were they were seen as heroes back then. Now, it's hard to say what mindset the vampire hunters back then came from. Did they know they were just killing people, or did they actually think they were, right? Or were they actually saving towns from serial killers? Like that's a good way to look at it. Like there was a lot of evidence of that being the case. So
they were like secret agents.
Basically, like they might have known this is all bullshit, but there's a murderer out here and I'm going to put them down, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
and it makes sense to tell people something like, "Hey, stay inside."
Exactly. Like, go inside. There's a vampire out here. Like, I'm gonna go have to cover it in holy water. And it's just a dude who's been killing people and drinking their blood. And he fucking cuts his head off. Because he's an actual trained fighter. Usually, these people were mercenaries who fought in wars. And this is the 16th century, so gunpowder is a thing.
And PTSD is always existing.
100%. So our first story takes place in 1521, following two men, Pierre Bourgois and Michael Verdun. Yeah, Verdun, same spelling, so probably came from there.
Probably.
These two are recorded in the annals of history as not only a serial killer team, but a pack of werewolves. During this year, multiple men were found dead or missing, and on one day, a man would shoot a wolf after getting attacked by it. So this wolf came at him and attacked him, and he shot it.
Right.
He would follow the wolf's bloody trail in an attempt to get its pelt to sell it, and at the end would find not a wolf, but a Michael Verdun wounded from a gunshot.
No way.
The man was convinced that he also saw the man transform from wolf to man, and the story would spread like wildfire. Verdun would be charged with lycanthropy, and he would become a self-proclaimed werewolf. He would self-proclaim himself as a werewolf and name his accomplices Philibert Monteau and Pierre Bourgois. Pierre Bourgois. Monteau and Bourgois. While Monteau would claim he was not a werewolf, Bourgois did, and he would tell the story that he was taken by Verdun to a pagan ritual site known as the Sabbat, where he would be initiated into becoming a werewolf. All three men would be convicted and burned at the stake. Because fire was the only way to kill werewolves, by the way, at the time.
Oh, okay.
Like, for surezies. Next,
burning anything just turns
yeah, pretty much, yeah. Next, we stay in France and tell the story of the serial killer Giles Garnier, who also would go by the nickname the Werewolf of Dole. Giles Garnier was a hermit who lived outside of Dole in the woods, and he had been recently married and moved his new wife to his home outside of town, which was almost completely isolated from society. He found it difficult to provide for his wife, having only ever fed just himself, and it caused discontent between them. During this time period, several children in and around Dole would go missing, or be found dead. Authorities at the time believed it to be the work of a werewolf due to the evidence, which I put in quotation marks, because I couldn't find any recorded evidence in this case, but it was likely bite marks on the bodies.
Right.
The authorities would issue an edict to encourage locals to go out and apprehend or kill the werewolf responsible. One night, workers... Yeah. Guys, go kill a guy.
yeah, exactly. Like, okay.
One night, workers from a neighboring village were walking home when they would find Giles Gardner over the body of a dead child, but they reported seeing a wolf over the body in the dark, and as they approached it, realized it was Giles Garnier, and would bring him into Dole. Garnier said at trial he was in the woods trying to hunt for food one day for him and his wife when a specter of the night approached him, offering to ease his troubles, and gave him an ointment that would allow him to transform into a wolf, making it easier for him to hunt.
I was about to say, that almost sounds like a lot of the Norse stuff.
Yes, similar, yeah. So he took it and then confessed to stalking, killing, and eating 4 children between the ages of 9 to 12.
Jeez.
He admitted to eating them on the spot after killing them in the form of the wolf, and then taking the remains back to his wife, telling her it was deer or boar meat, and she would then cook it up and eat it.
Okay. Poor kids. Yeah.
Garnier was found guilty of lycanthropy and witchcraft, and then soon burned at the stake on January 18th, 1574. He was
just charged that guy with killing kids.
That's my favorite part of these stories, Pat. They never get charged with murder. It's always lycanthropy. Every time. Yeah, it's lycanthropy. It's like... so he
killed a kid. He's got to be a werewolf.
Yeah.
Wait, why we don't kill the kid?
How many people did he kill? Lycanthropy. That's the charge. We'll burn him at the stake.
It doesn't matter. Okay.
So also just to note, he was recorded as a wolf hybrid, not a wolf form. He was a Lugaroo. This is a Lugaroo story.
Right.
So, just to note that. Now, that story's done. Now, this is where it gets crazy. The last story is what this whole episode was actually originally going to be. I started writing this part, so it kind of takes a different tone as well, because this was the whole original episode. It was going to be our first true crime story. But
Wow.
it really, unfortunately, it's from 1582, and there's not a ton of evidence recorded, written down, and logged. But it's this story comes from Bedburg, Germany, 1582, and it is the most infamous story of a real life werewolf, basically, that we have. This is the story of Peter Stube, the werewolf of Bedburg. So
I laughed at his name.
Yeah, Peter Stube. He's actually got like 5 different last names. This is the one I stuck with. It's not really known why he has so many different last names, but it's
yeah.
It's we're gonna go with Stube for this episode because that's the one that he's most commonly known by. Peter Stube. It's Stubbe. I think it's pronounced Stube. He was a wealthy farmer in the rural community of Bedburg, located in the electorate of Cologne, Germany. He was known among the people as a nice guy and a widower, father of 2 adolescent children, whose wealth ensured him a measure of respect and even influence among the people. Peter Stube, however, would only use this as his kindly public face, his true nature hidden. His true nature was that which would only show itself when he would don the skin of the wolf and fill his mind with bloodlust.
Oh dear, okay.
So it's important to talk about this area during the time period. Catholicism and Protestantism were literally at war for the hearts of the minds of the populace. The Protestant church had ridden, and this area was heavily Catholic, Germany, and the northern and eastern Protestants were always moving in on them. Invading armies would arrive in Bedburg from both faiths, sometimes even having small skirmishes. Europe at this time was not only rife with war, but also plague. The Black Plague still existed in pockets of Germany at this time, and Bedburg was no different, and this caused a general time of strife in the Bedburg area. And death was common, and it was so common, be it from gun, blade, or plague, it made it the perfect place for a person such as Peter Stube to become a killer, maybe even become a werewolf.
Dun, dun, dun.
For years, farmers in Bedburg were having a problem. They would find their cows killed in strange ways. Daily, and for weeks, they would find dead cattle in their pastures, ripped open and partially eaten, looking as if a beast had torn into them, but left most of the meat behind, almost as if it was an animal killing for sport. Often, the animals would be opened up with their guts strewn among the grass around them, as if to purposely look more bloody than it needed to be. The farmers gathered and soon determined that the culprit must be wolves, or a single lone wolf, and would gather up and go wolf hunting, but would fail to turn up any wolves in the area. Little did the farmers know, this was merely the beginning of Stube's compulsion to kill with extreme violence. Soon, it would evolve, and children began to disappear from their farms and homes.
Oh dear.
Stube had moved from cattle to children.
Why is it always kids? Because it's easy targets.
Easy,
right.
yeah, easier.
I answered my own question. Got it.
But soon after that, young women would start going missing. When they were simply walking to town or back to work, or back home, on a path they would normally travel, paths that were known to be safe. Also, for record, extremely low crime rate at this time in this area. So, I think war was too prevalent for crime to be important. So, it was just kind of, that was the mindset. So many of these victims were never found, but some were discovered the next day. Children specifically would often be found with their throats ripped open and their insides mostly removed, which large amounts of their innards and meat eaten.
God damn. All right.
The women will be stripped naked, with their bodies torn to shreds and limbs often severed and spread out around the area.
What is this, the Black Dahlia murder? Hey, sorry.
Close. It seemed obvious to the town folk that this was not that only a pack of wolves could do this. No other option. So they set out, just as before, with pikes and guns to go hunt wolves. And they would actually come back with dead wolves multiple times because they kept finding bodies.
Right. It's like the wolves are like, we didn't do it. We didn't do it.
They kept finding bodies, and people would keep going missing. The locals would start to spread stories that they heard from French merchants, stories of a vicious werewolves who had recently caused so much death in the country of France. Panic soon struck Bedburg, and they would begin to believe this had to be a man who could transform and eat humans' flesh. Unfortunately, for those involved, this was in fact the case, at least partially.
Right.
Peter Stubb, who at this time would go under the name Abel Grimwald when in town, would cloak himself in the pelt of a wolf when hunting his victims. He would later say, at the age of 12, he was gifted a magical belt of wolf fur from Satan. And when he put it on, he would transform into, quote, the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled with the brands of fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body and mighty paws, unquote.
Wow. Those aren't some cute toe beans that you want to play with.
No. He would then add that when the belt was removed, he would return to human form.
Right. A lot of magical belts.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. Stube would turn out to be one of the history's most horrific serial killers, taking on the role of a werewolf when making his kills. He was responsible for the death of at least 16 people he would be convicted for, but it is likely to be a much, much higher number, as a large amount of people would go missing to this report, but we don't have a number. But we do know, from what I could tell, the missing people at this time period was around 120. I don't think they were all kills of him, but I do think a lot of them were.
Right. Man, what a psycho.
Yeah.
What an absolute fucking psycho.
Yeah. This guy is insane. The young women amongst his victim would be sexually assaulted every single time, likely after death, before being torn up and eaten.
No.
This is the part that I think is really worth the content warning. Pregnant women were especially bad, and it's something he liked to target. He would rip their fetuses from their wombs and, quote, ate their hearts, panting hot and raw, end quote, and would further to describe them as his favorite, quote, dainty morsels, unquote.
I hope he doesn't get reincarnated.
Yeah, no, at least if he does, hopefully it's as a fly for a long time.
Yeah.
So small children were often strangled with their throats ripped by his bare hands before being disemboweled and partially eaten. Amongst his victims was even his own son, which he led out into the woods before killing the boy and eating his brain.
No, you don't kill your own kid.
It is unknown how old the kid was at this time, but likely around 5 to 9 years old.
You kill other people's kids.
Yeah, got his own son.
God damn it.
A story was also told by Stube at his interrogation, seeing two men and women walking outside of town when he called from around a corner asking for help lifting some lumber. He then donned the wolf skin and killed the first young man who turned the corner. The second man then met a similar fate when following a call. The woman, thinking something was up, began to run, but unfortunately was caught. The men's bodies were found later, battered and ripped, but the woman's body was never found, and he claimed he ate the body in its entirety.
Okay. Well, there you go. At least he's clean on that one.
Yeah. So, there you go.
Himself.
There is only one report of a survivor, which was when Stube ran after several children who were playing amongst cows in a field. Stube grabbed a girl by the neck, but her high-starched collar stopped him from being able to tear her throat. She then called out, the cows got startled, and charged Stube. Likely thinking he was there to kill their calves, Stube had to retreat and run away.
Wow. Good for her.
Yeah. It is also recorded that he admitted to having incestuous relationships with his sister and his own daughter, getting them both pregnant.
This guy, all around, just a real winner.
Jesus Christ. He is one of history's absolute worst serial killers. No doubt about it.
Seriously. No doubt about it.
So during this whole time, Stube was living amongst the town people. walking among them and even drinking with those whose friends and children he had murdered and eaten the previous day. He thought himself invincible due to his magic belt, but in the end, that would be what got him caught. When limbs were found in a field and determined to belong to the missing people, they believed a wolf in the area was responsible, and their dogs picked up the scent. It is said they began chasing the wolf for multiple days in the woods, following its tracks, and the dogs picking up the scent and seeing it on occasion. According to all present, the account states that they saw and chased down a large wolf, not a man. The dogs chased the animal until they had it cornered, but when the hunters caught up to where the wolf was, they saw nothing but Peter Stube cowering.
Oh, wow.
Who the hunters knew, because they drank with him at night and would hang out with him in town. According to the account of one George Bohr, being trapped with no room to escape, Stube removed his magic belt, transforming him into a human. The hunters who were there, however, stated seeing no magic belt, as Stube later claimed he had.
Right.
But only seeing him holding a walking stick in his hand. Uncertain that the killer was truly Stube, having known him, they escorted him back home. However, when he arrived at his house, his family identified him and did confirm that he killed a woman. He was arrested and then taken back to town for his crimes.
That's good.
Yeah. Thought to be a werewolf, Stube was brought to trial, and under pain of torture on the rack, he would confess to his heinous crimes and all the quotes I have been reading earlier.
Right.
He would also confess to sorcery and tell the story of his consort with the devil and his magic belt. This has led some historians to believing he may not have even been guilty and was not responsible for these crimes, but his confession was elicited by torture, taking on the idea that he was a victim of a religious war at the time. The argument being that the fear of convicting a devil-worshipping demonic werewolf would be a great way to get people to return to the true church and become Catholic again.
Oh, sure, that's definitely a thing.
The people, however, did die. These are recorded deaths. And due to the way Peter Stube would describe the events, I fully believe he was guilty. If you listen to famous modern killers such as John Wayne Gacy and Ed Gein, it sounds scarily similar to the way they describe their kills and the way they describe how they liked doing it and how they would partake in eating their victims, stuff like that. It's very similar.
Right.
He was tortured, but would publicly go into heavy detail with his kills and thoughts, as well as his relations with women of his own household. Stube was found guilty of lycanthropy on October 28th, 1589, and was sentenced to one of the most gruesome executions I have ever heard of.
Okay.
He was strapped spread eagle to a large wheel. Executioners would then use red-hot pincers to peel the flesh from his bones in 10 different spots. His arms and legs would then be broken via axe, and he then finally had his head removed.
Just shoot the guy in the face. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he did a lot of pain and suffering causing others, so, I guess they did it to him.
They wanted to give it back to him. Yeah, I get it.
But that wasn't the end of his execution, despite his head being removed. For on October 31st, Peter Stube's body was posted on the stake alongside his daughter and sister, both of whom were convicted of aiding and abetting in his crimes, and all three were burned at the stake.
Well, that's one way to get rid of him.
Yep. Then he's dead.
Fucking Christ.
The wheel which he was killed on was posted in town square atop 16 wooden strips representing each of the victims, and a framed wolf likeness was posted on the wheel, and Peter Stube's head mounted on top, a warning to werewolves and other Satan worshippers of the area to stay away.
Yeah, that would scare the shit out of any townsperson, I think.
Yeah. That's the story of Peter Stube. That was what I was originally writing as this episode. But that was basically all I could find. That was all the information I could find. So that wasn't enough for obviously a whole episode of Lore Lords.
So I might as well make it about werewolves.
Yeah, so I was like, let's do a whole werewolf thing because I love folklore and werewolves, so it's great. But yeah, those were real life stories of serial killers who were accused of being werewolves. Now there may be a medical explanation for all of this and stuff like that, but that's going to be the final part that we're going into now. Part 4, Are werewolves real? in the case of Peter Stube, Giles Garner, and others, I think it's pretty obvious they were just serial killers who were caught and tried to use being a werewolf as an excuse.
Right, yeah.
It's possible it was an attempt for sympathy, with their legacy remaining a bit intact, maybe going under the idea it wasn't their fault they were a monster, except for Stubes, who admitted to putting a magic belt on of his own will.
Right.
Werewolf legends were so widespread and throughout so many cultures, many people think there must be some truth to them, right? Like, a lot of people believe in werewolves. Like all things, I don't believe it until I see it. But
Same.
Discussed in the previous Skinwalker episode, I do know people that have seen Skinwalkers and fully believe them. And I believe that they believe it. And that's scary enough to me. So,
Right, yeah.
you know?
Well, I think that, like, I mean, we were talking about the specificity of werewolves earlier, and like that's one thing. Whereas like something like a Skinwalker or Wendigo, it's not as specific. It's sort of like it's way more nuanced. It has a lot more like, nah, they're just shapeshifters, and like they just kill people. Like it's not like about, oh, the moon has to be at a certain angle with the belt wearing, and then you gotta also do this chant and meet a witch. Like no, that's all very, very, specific. So
as I just mentioned, there may be a medical explanation, however. Do you know the story of Peter the Wild Boy?
No, I don't.
Peter the Wild Boy was a case of a boy being found naked, wandering on all fours in Germany in the Black Forest in 1725. Many thought he was a werewolf or raised by wolves. He ate with his hands. He couldn't speak, but he was eventually adopted by King George I of England, and would continue onward to the court of King George II, and lived out his days as their pet.
Oh, okay. So he did. Okay.
Yeah. So, weird.
That's a little weird.
But it's likely, looking back at this, that he had Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, which is a condition discovered in 1978 that causes lack of speech, high seizure rate, distinct facial features that look a bit more animalistic, and difficulty breathing with intellectual challenges.
Okay. That's all right.
So, a bit more like bestial, right? This isn't even the only medical condition, though, to be associated with werewolves. So first and foremost, I want to talk about the medical condition which is real, called lycanthropy.
Right.
Lycanthropy is a rare rare psychological condition that causes people to believe they're changing into wolves or other animals. And this isn't someone on TikTok claiming they have a wolf spirit inside them. This is people will have a mental condition that will be able to pass polygraph tests flawlessly when talking about turning into wolves or something like that. So this is like an actual mental condition where, they get put in like a lot. There's been cases of them put into psychiatric hospitals where they get told it's a full moon and they transform and they are on film howling and scratching, but they do not transform. But when interviewed about it on polygraphs, they tell stories of breaking out that night and going out and eating people, or trying to claw out the door thing, and they pass the test. They fully believe this is happening. So someone like Peter Stube could have had this mental condition. He could have thought he actually was turning, when he put this wolf on, I'm a werewolf. Like that was actually happening in his head.
Man, that's probably it. Honestly, he's probably he was clearly a sick man in some ways, but.
Yeah. Hypertrichosis, I believe it's pronounced, is a rare genetic disorder that causes excessive hair growth all over the bodies. So, if you were to pair that with lycanthropy, there you go.
I know a couple people with a little too hairy, you know what I'm saying? Hair all the way down the backs and shit.
I do too. Next one, rabies. People do suffer. People can get rabies and do suffer from rabies, which makes them chase and bite people a lot. So that's always a possibility.
Yep.
Next, hallucination, possibly caused by herbs that were commonly used as medical treatment at the time, or mushrooms.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
That's also a possibility. Sorry. So as far as like medical side, people did do it for fun back then too, obviously. So
sure, yeah.
But as far as medical reasons, that's about all I could find. And just closing notes.
Not a bad trip.
Yeah, especially if you kill someone and eat them. I know I've heard about having the munchies, but Jesus.
Yeah, right.
As far as do people believe they're real? Yes, a lot of people do. There's a lot of people out there that believe werewolves do exist, from skinwalkers to actual European Howl at the Moon Night shapeshifters. Are they real? I'll have to see it to believe it, But like most folklore, there are people out there that believe it does exist.
Right. Man, I admit that, like, you know, when we talked, about like the cryptids and the Wendigos and skinwalkers and stuff, there was that talk of the uncanny valley, which is something that I could relate to, like with that one time about hearing what I thought I heard.
Yeah.
But with the werewolf stuff, I just never saw it as like a legitimate thing. Like even as a kid, I was just kind of
fully same.
Wolves.
Yeah.
I was like, that doesn't happen. I'm again, but like you said, there are people who, you know, will talk about skinwalkers and be like, oh yeah, no, they're real.
Yeah.
And in those cases, it's kind of like, well, I'm not about to try to convince you they're not. So,
yeah, exactly.
Like,
and not only that, it's like I've seen you tell me your skinwalker story and be legitimately scared telling it yourself, which makes me fully believe you that you believe this, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Like that's like a scary thing in itself.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Belief is it's a very powerful weapon, you know?
Yeah. But that's all I got today for werewolves.
Damn. Well, that was it was pretty dark.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely some gruesome stuff in there, but again, I don't think it was too bad.
No. But you know, the eating fetus thing is really when I was like, ugh, okay, you know, his favorite thing to do was eat fetuses out of pregnant women. Like that's pretty fucked.
That's very fucked. Yeah.
That's as fucked as you can get, basically.
That person is gone.
Yeah.
You know, that is a long gone human being.
Yeah, and I love folklore on top of cryptids. They kind of fit in the same folder for me. I wouldn't call werewolves a cryptid. I would call skinwalkers more of a cryptid. But even then, they both fit the folklore aspect. Because werewolves, like in Europe, like you don't hear people talk about werewolves stalking the streets of Prague. You know what I mean? Like that's not a thing anymore.
Yeah.
So, but like some people do, you know. But mostly, it's like they're just a folklore entity. And I want to do a lot of episodes in the future on different folklore things, from like sirens to, of course, vampires, you know, ghouls, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of stuff I love like that I would like to go into.
I would love for you and I to do like a Lore Lords offshoot series where we talk to people who claim to have these experiences. Because I'd love to talk to somebody who's like, no, I've seen a Wendigo, or I've seen a.
I have someone. I have a close friend who has a skinwalker story, so that could be done. It's possible.
If they're open to being recorded and being on like, that would be super fun, because again, I love sharing those stories that and there's a lot of inspiration that can be brought from these types of things, and I think that some of these episodes are definitely favorites among the audience.
Yeah,
so.
This is one that, you know, this is our first like mythical folklore creature. Vampires are fully coming. Like I'm gonna do it. Like it's gonna come soon.
Right.
And I guess that's all we got for tonight. So
sounds good.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening and being here.
Thank you very much, guys.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next episode.